You ready? You're listening to the Real Pineapple Podcast Network. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, gays and gays. This is the Real Pineapple. This is your humble host, Hunter, here. Hope you're having a great night, day, weekend, whenever you're checking this out. Um, I'm really excited. I had the privilege of reviewing. The review will be live as this review is up as well. This documentary called Love 2020, and I have the writer and the director of said documentary here with me today. She was gracious enough to make some time to talk to us today. Jacqueline Joseph. Jacqueline, how you doing today?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. Excited to talk about Love, 2020.
Yeah, thank you so much again for making the time. So I'm just gonna jump in right out the gate here. When I saw the trailer for this, I was like, oh wow, I'm actually legit from a logistical perspective. I'm just intrigued on how this worked. What was your motivation as far as like telling this documentary, like telling the story? Like, why was this something that you wanted to tackle?
Well, it was an interesting time in New York City during the summer of 2020. And having been in New York the entire time since the pandemic began, there was a lot of discussion, especially in tennis circles, about the upcoming 2020 US Open and also other major sporting events. And there was a discussion about should the US Open take place, should it not take place? This is before vaccines and COVID was still raging in the United States and in other parts of the world.
So when you decided to tackle this initially, because I think that the big thing that comes across, especially as you watch the documentary, is like how like there's this aura of uncertainty, surrounding the whole documentary as far as, a constant moving target as far as, um COVID going up and all these things. And I will say it's almost like it's a fascinating slash terrifying kind of time capsule that I think people kind of watch and go, "Oh yeah, that was a thing." Um, kind of talk to me about your relationship with tennis. Was it something that you grew up with? Was it something you discovered like later on, or?
I mean, I think what was interesting about, just as you said, we saw this as an opportunity to capture a unique moment, not just in US Open tennis and sports history, but New York and world history, because the 2020 US Open was going to be the first and was the first live international sporting event held during the pandemic. And it really, really helped to lay the groundwork for the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics with what was learned from that experience of athletes from all over the world converging on New York City, which was the epicenter of COVID. And so we thought it was a fascinating opportunity to explore the role and power of sports during unprecedented times.
Yeah, I know for myself, I think like a lot of people, and I'll ask you, on this front, what was kind of your experience? Like, were you living in New York when all this? Oh, okay, shit. Okay, that's so like I'm over here on the West Coast, and I remember at the time, when I was working, getting the memo of like, oh yeah, you're gonna go home and work from home for a few weeks. We'll see you in a few weeks, and then a few weeks turned into, 2 years. 2 years. Um, what were you doing like when lockdown happened? Like were you working? Like were you putting this like what were you doing?
There were a number of projects that were in different stages. I had actually just come home from the 2020 Australian Open in the beginning of February. It was there for work for a couple of other projects. And within a couple of weeks, in the beginning of March, everything started to really start to shut down. And I
Yeah.
was in New York City every single day through the 2020 US Open and beyond. So I was living the experience of being in New York City and during the pandemic and seeing what that experience was happening while connecting with friends and colleagues around the world and following what was happening all over the world as well. So I felt like it was a unique opportunity to discuss the New York story and the US Open story and contextualize it historically and look at the role and power of sports.
So one thing I was really impressed with this documentary, and this is a direct compliment to you, is that I felt like given the New York aspect of this, given the tennis aspect of it, I was wondering how those aspects would kind of gel together as far as the documentary. And I think that you do an incredible job of like maintaining both plates because I do feel that for maybe someone doing their first documentary or someone who just wasn't aware of how to tackle this, that it would be overwhelming. And yet, like, you take all of that and you make it fit so well while making it informative and while, to an extent, making it cautionary. And I kind of want to talk to you about the cautionary aspect because there are multiple moments where um, the history of tennis and not being super great to women, to put it mildly, is brought up. How important were the social aspects as far as bringing those to the forefront of this documentary for you?
I mean, I think you've laid out a really fascinating question and something that we tried to tackle because initially the idea and when I discussed the possibility, which was right before the start of the 2020 US Open, it was very much a last minute idea of doing the documentary. At first, it was really about, should the event take place and it would be the first live international event, but everything changed because social justice and Black Lives Matter protests in New York City and around the world started to take place. And so, in a sense, the 2020 US Open became not just the most activist US Open, but the most activist Grand Slam ever. And so I think it was a really fascinating opportunity to show the power that professional tennis had to broadcast these messages of hope and positive things that were transpiring during the 2020 US Open all over the world because the tournament did not have fans, but it was broadcast around the world. And to your point, there are actually, I think tennis has played a leading role in terms of social justice and both for women and for minorities. Obviously, the US Open takes place at Billie Jean King National Tennis Center. The main stadium is named after Arthur Ashe, who was an incredible tennis player and person both on and off the court. And so it was an opportunity to highlight not just historically what professional tennis and the US Open in particular has done, but a number of things that ended up taking place during the 2020 US Open that were very impactful.
So speaking to that, I will say myself, like as a, I'd say casual tennis watcher, um, I could maybe name like three male tennis players. Like most of the tennis players, I just rattle off would be female players. Um, I know that's not the case in every sport. Um, I was having the conversation about the WNBA and about, Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark the other day with a friend. So I guess my question would be, from the female perspective, what is it about tennis that it's kind of allowed it to get push females more to the forefront as opposed to other sports? Like, do you have do you have a theory on that or?
I think two things. I mean, one thing I just want to say about the film first, and then I'll address that as part of it is to your point, the athletes that are featured in the film, our focus was not to focus on superstars, but to really focus on a very international cast of athletes and also athletes who had a sort of different story and journey to tell so that we had different perspectives and how the 2020 US Open impacted their lives and their careers. So Francis Tiafoe is obviously very well known.
Loved him. Yeah.
Yeah. Jamie Murray from the UK is a multiple Grand Slam champion. Rohan Bopanna from India, who just became number one and has won multiple Grand Slams. Bradley Klahn, Cristiano American, Stefan Houdet from France, and Yui Kimiji. It's a very international cast of characters because tennis is a very international sport, and we thought that this was a New York story which resonated worldwide. So it was important to have international perspective on that. But to your point, female professional tennis has been the most successful female professional sport historically for a very long time. And I think that pioneers like Billie Jean King and Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert, the fact that they in first of all, professional tennis is an individual sport, and athletes
Yes.
when they're on TV are not wearing a helmet or anything, so you see their faces, unlike football players. It's also very international, so athletes who are successful historically and today in professional tennis become worldwide superstars, not just nationally. And obviously the WNBA, what's been happening recently, which is fantastic with, and also with professional female soccer, there are team sports that are
Yes.
starting to become more and more popular. But for decades, women's professional tennis has been the leading professional sport for women, and golf has started to become more popular. But again, I think the global footprint and the leaders that tennis has had, and we delve into that to provide some historical context in the film.
Yeah, I was gonna bring. I love that you brought up the battle of the sexes because I was kind of waiting. I was like, okay, I was like, I'm sure she'll bring it up, and then when you did, I was like, okay, yeah, there it is. Um, Something that blew my mind, and just as a guy, I was like not surprised, but also just like saddened, is seeing that women weren't allowed to run marathons because I saw that, I was like, oh God, like it just like so. So I will ask you from this perspective, do you like, and as a black man, I will say I was really appreciative that you brought up the Black Lives Matter movement and all that throughout the film because in the origins of that happening, I think one thing that lockdown ironically did that was a good thing is that it kind of allowed me at least to know where certain people stood on certain things that were important to me and understanding like, oh, I thought you would, okay, like we need to not talk anymore. And and I actually liked the way that you got into the political aspects and how that gets into sports. Um, was there any hesitancy as far as like how to approach that throughout the documentary? Because I think there is from a certain section of people, there is that like, why are you being preachy? But you also want to be informative. So was there kind of a push and pull on like how to approach that aspect or
I mean, I think that there is always a debate about what role people who are well known should play given the platforms that they have and how they use those platforms. And I'll let the film speak for itself with respect to how the athletes in the film and other athletes have chosen to do that. I think that one of the things that we really wanted to do was to highlight and shine a light and focus on the positive things that ended up coming out of this professional tennis tournament that took place in New York City in the middle of a global pandemic, and things that reverberated way beyond New York City and tennis and sports and will continue to. And Francis Tiafoe, who you mentioned, I mean, some of the things that he did during the summer and specifically during the 2020 US Open. Watch the film and you'll learn
yes.
more about that. But I also think that there were interesting comments, and I don't want to paraphrase because Francis said it more eloquently than I could, about talking about his experience during the pandemic before the US Open in the months before, and to respond to what you said, the impact that it had not just on him but everybody. And I thought that was really fascinating, talking about famous people and regular people, and being a tennis player traveling around the world and now not able to travel, as some of the other athletes talked about. But in a way, to your point, it was everyone was in the same position, regardless of their position before the pandemic started, in terms of what their lives were like, because everyone was locked down globally.
Hmm. One thing that you pointed out that it's a nice little blip in the film, and but I appreciate you spend about probably 10 minutes on it, is that you talked about Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the term. Well, you talked about rackets down, hands up, which was something that I love that you brought that up. But you talked about how the U.S. Open venue workers were able to provide all these meals for people in New York, people who weren't able to go the feed the front lines. That's what it was. Um,
Yeah.
so that felt like a very New York thing, and I remember actually reading about that when the pandemic was at its peak. Can you please talk to me about including that? Because I think that's one of those things that people almost forget about is like the sense of community that a lot of people were just, I'll pick up some groceries for you if I'm out. Like, I think that's an aspect that got lost in all the doom and gloom. Can you talk to me about including that in the film and why that was important?
It was very important, and thank you for mentioning it. I mean, two different aspects of it. One, we really wanted to sort of explain what the situation was in New York City in the months leading up to the US Open to let people understand exactly how complicated and dire the situation was on multiple levels. And to your point, the US Open venue, which in literally a couple of months ended up hosting the 2020 US Open, was set up as a field hospital. And there were meals given out to people in New York City who needed meals. And there was staff that was staffing the stadium at the US Open literally a few months before this. And so that, I think, helped to illustrate exactly how difficult the situation was in New York, and also how challenging it was to decide, can we hold this tournament, meaning the 2020 US Open? Should we be holding the 2020 US Open, and how can we do it successfully and safely for everyone in New York, for the athletes coming to compete in the tournament? And so it's very much a New York story, but it's a New York story that I think everyone can understand and relate to wherever they live in the world, because they experience something, and we just wanted to sort of set the groundwork for what the situation was like in New York City.
Yeah, I mean, I know being out here in Nevada, I was doing a lot of grocery a lot of grocery pickup like very like 5 a.m. like before anyone would show up. Like I was like getting in, getting out. Um, Talk to me about your COVID experience because like myself, I was isolating with my partner for a couple months, but then she got to go back to work, so she was working with the public, so we didn't see each other for like 9 months because, no vaccine or anything yet. And so it was really working from home and talking to my cats. That was my that was really my experience and trying to keep some sort of mental stability. Can you kind of talk to me about what your lockdown experience was like?
Well, I mean, it was a really unique experience in so many ways in New York City. So many people left the city. I was still in New York, and in a way, it was, there were so few people out and about when you did go outside, even though
No.
you obviously, to your, tried to get things delivered, tried not to be around people and all that sort of thing. But I think what was really wonderful was the virtual connections that everyone shared, not
Yes.
just people who were in New York City, but that, I think, connected everyone in a way. And I think those virtual connections have continued in a way that they didn't exist before the pandemic. And that's, I think, a very positive thing. And I think that having those virtual connections with friends and family and colleagues around the United States and around the world was fascinating to understand the evolution and the reaction to the pandemic, which was very different depending on where you were in the world at different points in time. And that's one of the things we tried to highlight, even in the summer leading up to the US Open, the situation in the United States versus the situation in Europe and elsewhere, and tennis being a global sport. So it was a unique experience that I don't think any of us will ever live through again.
Well said. Couple more questions for you. So myself, one thing that I really liked about watching this film, not just the international aspect, because one of the things that you highlight is that there were more than 300 players from 55 uh countries that are flown in for this bubble, which hearing that number, you think about all the travel and all these different places and oh my God, who are they interacting with? Like, so like just logistically on that aspect, I was like, oh my God, that's so much. And you don't shy away from the fact that there were people who got pulled and yet they had to, adjust rankings and all these things. Um, was there anything on the documentary that you kind of wish, like, oh, I wish we had more time to talk about this, or oh, we had to cut this? Was there anything on the cutting room floor that you wish could have made it in the documentary but just didn't fit your vision, or?
I mean, it's a good question. There are always things that are left on the cutting room floor, and I think that the editing of any documentary is fascinating and challenging and fun experience, and interweaving multiple stories from different athletes and providing historical context and the situation in New York. It was a huge challenge, the editing of this film and finding the right balance and making the story flow. So there are always things that you wish that you could include, and you try your best to sort of provide a story that's compelling and entertaining and illustrates the situation and highlights the moments and the experiences that are most compelling for the athletes in the film and the story itself.
Well said. So I know for myself, there's this quote. You end on a quote that I absolutely love that Arthur Ashe said. I won't spoil the quote, but I love that you ended it on that. I thought that was an incredibly nice touch. Here it is. Rohan had this one quote that just kind of blew me away, and I kind of wanted to get your perspective on this being a female director, where he's talking about how he gave back to his country by like opening up this center for people to go ahead and experience tennis and like learn from these great coaches and everything. And the quote he had was, "We have tremendous talent, just not many opportunities." And that was a quote I which went, wow, that hits really hard. Kind of talk to me about from your perspective, because for myself, to put myself on Front Street a little bit, um, especially as we get closer to the election, I personally get more political as things get go on, and I feel a certain responsibility to my audience and to others who may not feel comfortable speaking on certain topics to bring them up. Um, Especially like the Olympics being a great example with the whole boxing thing, which that would be a whole other conversation. But um, how does that quote resonate with you, and what do you do as a female director? Kind of go ahead and put like how's that resonate with you?
I mean, I think the quote that you mentioned and so many other things that Rohan shares about his experience, shares in the film about his various experiences is very impactful and inspiring to me. And as a tennis player he's a tennis player coming from India. The population, I believe, is a billion or more than a billion people. And he talked about, speaking about the cutting room floor, we had to trim, but he talked about the number of professional tennis tournaments or lack thereof at different levels, and look at the population and compare it to Europe, the United States, and other parts of the world. And so he has established a tennis academy, and even while he's still competing. And so his goal is really to be both an inspiration and a support for hopefully the next generation of Indian tennis players, starting with little girls and little boys who are training at his tennis academy, which is fantastic.
Yeah. One other thing I did want to bring up, and I want to personally thank you for this because I think this is something that gets lost in translation, with how lockdown happened. I was very happy you brought up the anti-Asian bias that was going on when COVID first started, because I remember there was a huge backlash on that, and I think that's something that people almost want to forget, but I was really happy that the documentary took several minutes to go ahead and remind people like, no, 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 this is how it was when it started, and we need to be very like cognizant of that. So major props to you for bringing that up. I really want to make sure I brought that up. So thank you for that. Um, And also, you brought up the fact that there is special treatment as far as getting into the country, which is something that I was like, okay, documentary. Like because when you think about with like rapid tests and everything, how that was at first, like those were in such limited supply at the time because we didn't know what we were dealing with. So I really appreciate the documentary bring up these things that, people just may not have remembered or may not want to remember. So thank you very much for that on that front. Last question I have for you, and it's typically one I end with a lot of my interviews after watching this, because I watched it, actually didn't get the link until like 6 this morning, so I was like, oh gosh. But I was able to watch this with my coffee, which was really nice. As far as the experience when people get to the end of this, is there a certain message? Is there something, certain thing that you want people to take away from this experience once they've had some time to digest it and kind of sit back and reflect on it?
I mean, it's a very good question. I like that's a question I would turn around to the audience when the film has its world premiere at Angelica in New York City next week. I don't want to tell people what they should take away from the film and what they should feel when they're watching a film. I'm more interested in how they do react to the film and what they think about it, whether their questions about it and what it leaves them with at the end of the experience of watching the film. And so I'll leave it there.
Fair. What I will tell you is that I personally left this feeling hopeful. I left this feeling inspired. It was really nice to be reminded of for all those people who say dumb things like shut up and dribble and like equivalents like to that. It's really great. I think you do a great history lesson as far as showing how history in sports, like in social activism, has always really been tied to sports. Not this isn't a new thing, but people just becoming more aware of it because it's on a larger scale now. So I think you did an incredible job painting that picture and really educating your audience on that. So I thought you did that's really the big thing I can say I could took away from this. So it's a very fun formal education, and I think that this is a unapologetically New York story. But I think that no matter where you're at in the world, you're going to be able to watch this and get take away a lot from it. So um, that's what I took away from it. So
No, I
um,
mean that's wonderful to hear and thank you. And people talk about, even in the most difficult times, there's always something positive that comes out of it. And even amidst, there's a great quote, I can't think of it off at the moment about, in the darkness you find the light. And I think hopefully that's true in the telling of the story of Love, 2020. People will realize that.
yeah. Um, yeah, I had an absolute joy watching this. Jacqueline, I really do appreciate you again making the time to talk with me today. Before we get out of here, if you could please tell people where they can watch the film and then where they can find you on socials before we get out of here.
Yeah, the best thing. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I love talking to you about the film, and people can learn more and follow the future release of Love, 2020. The website is love2020film.com, and the social media is at Love 2020 Film. And that's where all the information after the world premiere at Angelica in New York City next week. That's where they can find all the information about how to watch the film and other upcoming events related to the film.
Perfect. Perfect, Jacqueline. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it. I'll be posting my review. I'll definitely email you once that's live. But again, I hope this does well. I hope this was artistically fruitful for you. It really came across like that. And again, thank you so much for making the time, and I really hope this does well.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your kind words. And it was great to chat with you and to virtually meet you as well. Thank you.
Likewise, Jacqueline, you take care.
You too.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye-bye.